So first of all, despite the result that is pretty much known of these elections, they're extremely confusing elections. For example, in the same poll that Nathan mentioned a couple of times, the Dachau poll, I opened the newspaper on Friday, Idiot Achronot, and the list went this way. Likud 33, Labour 18, Bennett 14, Lapid 11, Shas 10, Livni 8, Meretz 6, Kadima 2. I mean, you see there are a mix of names of the parties, of the big parties that are known to everyone, and names of people that established new parties or took some old parties and refurbished them, because people just don't recognize them. When you talk to Israelis in the same cafe probably that Nathan was sitting at, they not always understand who of these new parties is running with whom, but there is a name recognition of the former TV personalities. And talking about confusing, these days when you have the election ads on the TV, sometimes it's hard to understand where is the TV anchor and where is the party leader, because in the next Knesset, I think according to some predictions, we will have something like 1 in 10 members of Knesset or ministers or whatever that will be that held once a press card. So I think in the once generals were the top source for top politicians. Then in 2000, I think there was a fashion for lawyers, etc. Now it's journalists. Now it's the most, I think, popular profession to make this switch to the Knesset. So I start feeling like an outcast a bit. So you know. But still, we have these two sources of information for voters. We have the political ads and we have the media, and I think voters are not satisfied with either of them. I mean, they do not think that the press is conveying truthful information. They're accusing, you know, some newspapers of being too biased to the right, to the left, etc. And I think that watching election TV ads is hardly the most popular pastime these days, because I think in 1969, when there was only one channel, the rating of political ads was about 80%, 80 to 90%. This year, on the first day of these ads broadcasted, it was 22% on all channels. And usually, when you're looking at the past election cycles, you see average of about 14%. So people do not really watch it, although the channels are obliged to dedicate time for it. They protest, especially the commercial, of course, channels. But still, this is a source of information. So, you know, I wouldn't entertain you with one of the most controversial ads that had actually of the Economy Party, that had a young woman stripping herself of clothes and saying that this is a demonstration of how the state is stripping us of, you know, with taxes and leaves us finally naked. And then you have, you know, this girl standing even without bra and two men standing in front and saying, did we really have to do this for you to pay attention to what we are saying on the Israeli economy? You know, so this is a bit an extreme example, but let's take some short clips of the recent ads that Israelis are seeing, and despite the fact that they were called boring and predictable by Israeli analysts, I think that we still can ask some questions when following them. Okay, so what we have here, we see an incumbent that tries to win re-election. So obviously he lists his achievements and talking about his future plans, and all is true basically because Israel does face tremendous challenges all around, and but there are some things missing in this ad. For example, you mentioned it before, the peace process with the Palestinians, and it is interesting that my colleagues were terrorizing Likud for weeks and weeks and couldn't get a party platform. I mean, the official party platform, and I think that as of yesterday, it wasn't published yet. So basically, they're saying that we have our policy. You can see our achievements, but a party platform is sort of formality that no one, I guess, needs today. And there was another interesting moment there. I think he mentioned erecting fence along all Israeli borders, but we should remember that Israel has still provisional borders in some parts, so I mean it's a bit murky question. And then he mentions Iran, and Iran largely disappeared from these elections, except for, I think, Netanyahu's ads. And these elections basically could be seen as a referendum on Iran and a possible attack on Iran, because Netanyahu, you remember his United Nations speech when he presented this cartoonish bomb and the red line. So the red line is expected, Iran is expected to cross this red line, according to Netanyahu, either in spring or in summer. So the next government will have to deal with it quite soon. So this could be called a referendum on Iran, basically. So let's see another ad. It actually reminds us, or supposed to remind, about diversity in the Israeli society, and I think not always in a positive sense.
מרינה.
Что?
בשביל מה הפקס?
ביתנו שלך, מתנה לחתונה.
נחמד מצידו. אבל מה פתאום פקס?
לקבל אישור.
אישור למה?
מכוכבית גיור.
כוכבית גיור?
דה, מחייגים כוכבית גיור ומקבלים אישור.
רגע, את לא יהודייה?
עכשיו כן.
Here you see the ad of the Shas party that was actually taken off air, I think, after only one day, because it was condemned all over of racism, etc., etc. And although it's not the first election cycle that there is a clash between two Netanyahu's basically natural allies, Shas, that could sit in any coalition because they're focused on their sectoral interests, basically, and Lieberman that wants civil marriages, that wants to promote the rights of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, because in Israel still 22 years since the beginning of this big aliyah, of this big influx of Russian Jews, about 400,000 of them are not considered Jews according to the halacha, which means they still cannot marry in Israel, although they could have, because of their father, perfectly Jewish last name, and could suffer discrimination in their country of origin, etc., etc. So there is still a conflict going on. This was quite an ugly story. The most funny thing, I think, was the explanations of Shas when they were, invited to TV shows to explain why did they, put such a blunt attack on the Russian community. They said, well, it's not about Russians at all. I mean, it doesn't. The fact that the girl is called Marina, speaks Russian, etc. It doesn't matter. We are talking in general about this idea of assimilation and the dangers of marrying non-Jews, etc. So we were not talking specifically Russian immigrants. We were attacking Lieberman and his ideas. So it was interpreted differently by many people in the Israeli society, so it was taken off. But you see that one of possible coalition members, one of the most probable, I think, coalition members, yes. So these are the views that they hold that clash with other parts of Israeli society. So as Nathan said, these elections, Netanyahu is attacked from the left and the right, and the same Naftali Bennett and the people who are hidden in his list. Well, there are some others hidden in his list that, well, let's see his ad, and I think you'll understand what I'm talking about.
טוב, הילה, סיימי עם האיפור, אני עושה עליו פוקוס. סדר את העניבה. תגיד, מה נסגר איתכם עם הנעליים?
הבית היהודי, המפלגה הכי קרבית בכנסת. הבית היהודי, בראשות נפתלי בנט.
Okay, just note that among the first 5 people on the list, there is a woman. She's just not. She just does not appear there. So you know, for me, one. By the way, one more thing. There is a party also that probably will not get to Knesset this time, but it's an interesting. It's an interesting experiment, you know, in trying to revive the sectoral politics, because there is actually another Russian sectoral party these elections that called the Israelis, and it's headed by another TV personality, this time from the Russian-Israeli channel, David Kohn, and he argues that there was some point that they almost crossed the electoral barrier at the beginning, and they're quite popular. I think they're number 2 among Russians after Lieberman and Netanyahu in polls, but still I don't think they will cross this time. But it's interesting that he says that there were once 3 Russian parties in Israel. All 3 of them were in the Knesset. There was Natan Sachs, there was Avigdor Lieberman, and there was Roman Bronfman, who was on the left, and later he joined Meretz. But the Meretz, you know, Bronfman didn't get to Knesset, and then Lieberman and Sharansky wanted to be big national leaders, so they abandoned the interests of this sector. So we need, once again, to protect their interests, so they're putting, you know, only Russian, Jewish, immigrant agenda on the top. So it's interesting that you see on the margins attempts like of this sort to deal with this. And just one last point. I think we saw it also in Dachau poll and in many other polls in Israel recently. Whenever we see, you know, the list of the parties, usually you see the Arab parties are listed just, you know, as Arab parties. You don't see any distinction between them, although they have very different agendas and so on. So usually the Arab population in Israel votes. I think it's only about. If, let's say, they have now 11 members of Knesset, if they would vote, you know, like 80%, for example, they could have 21. And it's interesting that even on the left, we don't see much proposals to, you know, let's join forces to coalition. They're sort of total outcasts. And Arab women are even farther away. Maybe if we will have time, we can touch on this later. Thank you very much.